and welcome. My name is Patty Murray, and I will be your host for today's FoodSafetyTech webinar, Creating an Effective HACCP Program for Today's Complex Supply Chain. Before we begin, let me provide you with some important housekeeping information. First, if you have any technical difficulties, please try logging off and then logging back in again. If this does not work, please contact WebEx support at 1-866-229-3239. Next, feel free to send in your questions for our speakers throughout the event using our Q&A feature. Lastly, SafetyChain will send you a copy of the slides and a link to the webinar archive by next Tuesday. Now I'll turn things over to Rick Byros, President and Publisher of FoodSafetyTech, who will introduce our agenda, speakers, and moderate a Q&A session after the presentations, during which we will address as many of your questions as possible. Rick?
Thank you, Patty, and welcome everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, SafetyChain Software. SafetyChain's mission is to help food suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and service companies enforce safety and quality compliance at all points along their supply chains. We have an informative agenda for you today, and we will be covering C's for creating an effective HACCP program and the data management and reporting that goes with that. Validation, verification, prerequisite programs, supplier compliance, audits, FISMA impact, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, how technology can help, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A session. Move to the next slide, please. Our guest today is Dr. Dan Schaffner from Rutgers University. Don will be joined later in the presentation by Dan Bernkopf from SafetyChain. I'm going to introduce Don now. Dr. Dan Schaffner is an extension specialist in food science and professor at Rutgers University. He also serves as the director of the Center for Advanced Food Technology. His research interests include quantitative and microbial risk assessment and predictive food microbiology. Schaffner has served on a variety of national and international expert committees, including the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the World Health Organization, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, the Institute of Food Technologists, the International Association of Food Protection, and the U.S. National Advisory Committee on Microbial Criteria for Food. Don?
Very much for that introduction, Rick, and also thanks to the folks at SafetyChain for sponsoring this presentation today. We have at hand creating an effective HACCP program for today's complex supply chain is probably one that would take more than 40 minutes to address. So I'm not going to try to obviously address it in its full complexity. It probably would take a semester-long course to do that. But what I do want to do for all of you folks on the call today is to look at what I think some of the challenges going forward in trying to design HACCP programs, or situations that I've encountered in the work that I've done with people in the food industry in the past, of areas where they tend to stuck or to have some difficulty. One of the things, too, that I want to say about my presentation today here is that I very much like teaching using case studies. And so throughout my presentation, there will be a number of case studies, either projects that I'm familiar with or projects that I've been involved with, to illustrate a particular point. With that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to cover a number of different things today. I want to talk about data management and reporting. There's a really nice study that my colleague Tejas Spat from the Institute of Food Technologists has been involved with on traceability. And I think that gets into some of the challenges and the complexities in doing this. Validation and verification are perennial problems. I've been to HACCP here at Rutgers University for more than 20 years, and validation and verification always trip people up. And so I'm going to, in as much as I can, in a couple of slides, highlight what I think are the key difference between those two things and how you can make sure that you get it right. Prerequisite programs are always a challenge as well, and here I'm going to share another case study from some work that I did for a food company. We're looking at their environmental sampling program and trying to figure out whether it really was doing anything in terms of making the food that they were manufacturing safer. In terms of supply management and compliance, again, another really challenging issue. Doesn't always fall within the purview of HACCP, at least not as it's classically taught. But again, I want to share with you an outbreak, an example that I'm familiar with, and this particular one I don't necessarily have answers. I do have some interesting questions which I hope will stimulate your thinking. Audits are a topic that's been in the news. There was a really nice piece by Bloomberg a number of weeks ago on this particular thing. And in fact, more recently, my colleague Doug Powell and others have just recently published an article in Control on some of the problems with audits. And so I want to share with you some of the key findings from that work. And then finally, I'm going to wrap things up today with a discussion of FISMA, including some predictions about when we might actually see some FISMA rules coming forward. And then, again, offer a little bit of hope where I'm going to talk about the Food Safety Preventive Control Alliance, which is a group that I've been involved with, which is working to develop training materials and a curriculum to help companies implement those FISMA rules that all of us are fairly sure are going to show up before too long. Okay. So open it with a discussion of data management and reporting. What I tried to do on this slide is just to indicate, well, first of all, to wish you all good luck, but to indicate some of the complexities that we especially have a problem with today. Back again when I started teaching HACCP 20 years ago, most of the kind of HACCP record keeping you saw are what you see in the upper left hand corner. You saw paper binders, and I still see a whole lot of that today. However, increasingly people are using other things. Ideally, you have information in some sort of a database or a spreadsheet. Increasingly, PDF documents are used to share information, and that's all well and good. However, I'm sure we've all had the frustrations of dealing with PDF documents that it's hard to sometimes work with them if you're trying to cut and paste information out of PDF documents. Sometimes they're just scans of documents that don't actually have information, so you have to run optical character recognition. And so integrating and relating all of this information can be a problem. And of course, a lot of these documents are sent via email. And again, we know there are always problems with that, finding whether did somebody actually receive documents or not, and did they open it, and could they read the attachment, and use that spam filter. So again, like I said, good luck with that. So we certainly do have some challenges today in terms of data management and reporting. I will talk about the IFT Traceability project, and I was involved with this in part because some of the funding that was provided for this project was from the National Center for Food Protection and Defense. This is a center that's based at the University of Minnesota that's focused on protecting the food supply from terrorists. And so I've been involved with this project kind of from the beginning. And I also want to mention again, not to shill for IFT too much. They are a great association. They're doing a lot of great work. I'm currently serving another expert panel for them, working on some projects for the FDA. They're a good group of folks. They really have the ability to bring together the food industry together nicely with academics and others to solve problems. They also have a traceability improvement initiative, which is a larger project. I'm just going to talk about the small little piece. Specifically, the objective of this particular project was to compare and contrast different traceability solutions, to look at opportunities and challenges in terms of interoperability of those solutions, to refine and to test critical tracking events, and also, again, how all this gets organized in terms of data structures and data elements. The participants and stakeholders include people from the food industry across a wide variety of commodity sectors, 9 different technology solution providers. So these are 9 different companies that volunteered to be a part of the project. They had technology that did the promise to deliver tracing capabilities, and then of course people from academia and other locations as well. And this is again thanks to TIS and to IFT for providing these slides. This is a summary of how the project went in the first year. And like I said, there were 9 different solution providers that were asked to be a part of this project, or that volunteered to be a part of this project. And I will also mention, too, that the traceability space is, I mean, obviously we know this is a really important space to the food industry. There's a whole lot of interest around traceability, and in fact, the space is constantly changing. And so the 9 companies that volunteered 2 years ago to be part of this project, the mix of companies that are available in this space has changed significantly since then. And so certainly don't, you can look at these 9 as being kind of representative of the state of the art in 2010, but there are certainly other players that are involved in the market. But what I want to point out to you here is specifically, I found absolutely fascinating that of those 9 providers, there were several that in fact were not even simply able to handle data entry. And so Tace is a good friend and colleague, and he's a little bit of a cagey fellow. And so he gave these technology providers, he gave them flawed data sets that had deliberately incorrect information in them. Because guess what? You work and live in the real world. You know that sometimes data that you get have mistakes in them. They have typos. They have errors. And so they just wanted to be sure to provide these companies with some world examples. So what happened then was, out of these 9 companies, 3 of them immediately washed out because they couldn't handle the data set that he had sent to them. And he challenged them with 2 different scenarios where there was an outbreak or there was a recall, and looked to see what their technology could do. So if there's a checkbox here, it means that the company succeeded. If there was an X, as I said, it means that they failed. But also, interestingly, a number of companies, when presented with the problem, well, here's a company that failed in response to scenario 1, and then obviously didn't even attempt to do scenario 2. I guess the good news coming out of all of this is that after 9 companies started out, still at the end of the project, there were 5 companies that in fact were able to successfully complete the 2 different scenarios. So that, I think, is probably a little bit of good news. Unfortunately, in terms of bad news department, again, we're still talking about the IFT Traceability project here. Tate just has indicated the number of days that it took for a company to respond to the data entry itself. And so again, even the data entry itself was very time consuming for companies, and then responding to the scenarios. I mean, all the companies acting like company number 1 here, where you get feedback within a day. But some of these technology providers were able to successfully complete the task, but they weren't able to complete the task for 4 or 5 or more days. And certainly when it comes to traceability and it comes to reacting to a contaminant that's in your supply chain, being able to move quickly is of the essence. And so I guess my main reason for wanting to include these slides is just to let you guys on the call know that traceability is hard. And as traceability companies come and go, they're faced really with some challenges. Good news is that there are some companies out there, and again, looking specific companies, even 1, 2, and 3, as being companies that were able to, within a couple of days, respond fairly quickly. So that is certainly some good news. What to do now is to change gears again and talk a little bit about verification and validation. And as I said in my introductory comments, verification and validation are 2 steps in HACCP that are probably the biggest challenge I find. And this is maybe record keeping, the biggest challenge to food companies today. Before I talk a little bit more about verification and validation, I think the reasons why these are such a challenge to people is that they really have very, very different meanings. Although they're sometimes used interchangeably, they're both commonly referred to. They actually mean very different things. So I say verification, I mean, are you actually following the plan? So in other words, there's a HACCP plan written down on paper, there's a flow diagram. If I were to walk through your plan with that flow diagram in my hand, would I be able to follow that flow diagram? And again, just as a way of showing in terms of anecdote, we did some house training for a company, for some companies. Probably it's been more than 10 years ago now, but it was a house HACCP training, and we started with their flow diagram. So we said, well, gee, as an exercise, let's go actually walk the plant floor and let's look at these existing diagrams. And what we discovered as we walked the plant floor and we tried to trace what was going on in the flow diagram, that in fact the flow diagram had changed, the actual flow in the actual plant had changed since the HACCP plan was created. So that would be an example of a failed verification. They were following their plan. They had changed their flow diagram. They had changed the product flow in the plant, but they had not modified the flow diagram. Despite that snafu, I have found generally that verification is relatively easy for people to understand, and it's relatively easy for people to implement. You look, you see what you propose to do, and then you go out and you look on the plant floor, and you see if what's happening matches what you say is happening. Validation, on the other hand, is much more problematic for companies to actually understand. So when I say validation, what I mean is, will the plan actually work to control the food safety risk at hand? And when will it actually work? Here I'm talking about specifically about scientific knowledge. What do we know about the science of controlling hazards? And again, in my case, it's probably principally microbiological hazards. What's about the science of controlling those hazards that tells us that the plan is often working? HACCP, in HACCP, validation is often considered part of verification. This in part leads to the confusion because people think, well, okay, I've got verification figured out. I don't need to worry about that other long word that also starts with the letter V. And in fact, yes, you do. It requires scientific knowledge. It requires an interpretation of data and judgment. And those things are not things, it's not like following a checklist. You actually have to have an individual who has a fairly deep knowledge to be able to make that happen in any kind of a meaningful way. So in case you're not completely confused by this point, and you'd like some additional verification, additional clarification rather, and maybe verification too, some additional clarification. Let's work through a couple of examples, and really very, very trivial examples, but I think it makes it clear that we're talking about two very different things when we're talking about verification and validation. So if HACCP plan says that you cook this product to at least 160 degrees height, and if you test the product and you measure the temperature when it comes out of at the end of the cooking process, and you find that the temperature is 161 degrees Fahrenheit, well, in fact, verified that step in the process. You determine that you are, in fact, for that given sample, you have cooked it to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And conversely, if the plan says that you're going to cook the product to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and you make a measurement and you discover that the product was in fact cooked to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, you're not verified. So I think this again is why I say repeatedly verification is rather simple. Now, where a lot of people get stuck is in this issue of validation. So, for example, if you say that my plan is to refrigerate the product to 45 degrees Fahrenheit to control salmonella, that is a scientifically valid statement. I go to the peer-reviewed literature, I can look up paper after paper after paper on the growth of salmonella, and you will find that there is no documented scientific evidence that salmonella will grow below its temperature of 45 degrees Fahrenheit. On the other hand, if I have the same statement, I'm going to refrigerate to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. But the reason why I'm doing that is that that's going to control the growth of Listeria. Again, you go to the scientific literature and you read about the growth of Listeria, what you'll find is that that, in fact, is an invalid statement. Listeria will grow at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, here's the confusion comes in. If you say that you're going to refrigerate to 45 degrees Fahrenheit and you make temperature measurements and it's less than 45, that's a perfectly verified statement. But it's not a valid statement if the purpose of refrigeration is to control Listeria. And so that's what I mean by requiring a higher level of knowledge and knowledge of the scientific literature. And the other thing, too, again, if those of you who are on the call who regularly read the scientific literature, you know this. For those of you who may not, what scientists and as food microbiologists believe is true, some changes. And the knowledge about the control of pathogens is not a static field. Certainly there are not big changes. There may be changes. There may be new pathogens. For example, if you were to say something like control refrigerate to 45 degrees to control all pathogens, that would not be correct because Listeria does not grow. Listeria grows below 45. But what if you change the temperature to one that did control Listeria and you still said all pathogens? Well, the pathogens that might be of concern in food safety change over time. So what if another pathogen comes along that's able to grow at an even lower temperature? Well, now your plan is also invalid scientifically. So you really need to choose those words very carefully in your HACCP plan, and you need to measure them against what's known in terms of the science. Okay. Those of you who are interested in learning more, I don't have too much to say. Again, we have a 2.5-day long course on this particular document. If you are looking to either fund a testing lab to do a challenge study for you, or if you are looking to do your own challenge study or your own validation study, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at this particular document. This is a document that's written by NACMF, which is for the National Advisory Committee on the Microbiological Criteria for Foods. And in this particular document, actually goes on for quite a few pages, this document lays out what a panel of experts thinks be done in terms of designing these studies. It goes over selection of strains, it goes over variation in product composition, it goes over sampling intervals. The publication of this document, there was not a lot of good information on this particular topic. And now this is really, again, I have a little bit of pride of authorship here. I was one of the team of folks that authored this, but it really is a tremendously useful document. And again, like I said, we've taught, along with my colleagues Linda Harris and Kathy Glass from University of Davis, California Davis, and University of Wisconsin-Madison, respectively, I taught a 2.5-day course on this, and it has been very well received. So if nothing else, please go out and get a copy of the document. I think it's freely available on the web if you have trouble locating it. And then if you can, we do offer that course again on a regular basis. It's pretty information. So again, encourage you to pursue that further. Let's talk about prerequisite programs. This is a comment that a good friend of mine from the Food and Drug Administration shared with me recently. It's not for attribution, so I've left off his name. This was a comment that he made specifically in response to the Sunland peanut butter recall. And he said, believe it or not, is properly reacting to finished product and environmental positives when you have them. And if you are a low moisture food manufacturer and you have not read this document that was published, that is again free available on the web. I just downloaded a fresh copy the other day from the Grocery Manufacturers Association. You are going to be in serious trouble. So please, again, go get a copy of this document. It is, if you have the challenge of controlling salmonella and you manufacture a low moisture food product, you should get this get this document. You should read it cover to cover. Sleeve it under your pillow so that maybe some knowledge will soak in at night. I can't say enough good about it. One thing I will say is that one of the authors of this document, Jenny Scott, is Jenny Scott. At the time, Jenny worked with the Grocery Manufacturers Association. She now works at the Food and Drug Administration. She is not this particular anonymous FDAer, but she now works for the FDA. So believe me, FDA has read and understood and utilizes the information that's in this document when they do inspections of food plants. So again, cannot praise that particular document highly enough. Okay, what I'll talk now about is another little case study based on some work that we did as a consulting assignment. And basically, the idea here is that this was a database of product, of samples rather, from a food processing plant. We had, this is already a pretty cluttered slide, so I'm going to try to not draw too much on here with my marker, but basically the idea is that there are, on this database, are 5,692 samples collected over a one-year time period. In this particular sampling program, the company sampled for salmonella, and was it present and was it absent? And they sampled for Enterobacteriaceae, which is an indicator organism, and those answers range from the Enterobacteriaceae, where E is absent, it's present levels of less than 100, it's present at levels of greater than 100, or it's present at levels, again, familiar microbiologists in the audience, as TNEC, that stands for too numerous to count. And the key point I'm trying to make here is if you calculate the odds of salmonella occurring on a surface, it's about 0.9%. The odds of Enterobacteriaceae occurring at this TNTC level is about 3.9%. If you calculate the odds of the two of them occurring together, it's about 0.4%. But the actual odds of them occurring together, and that's what's represented by this black line up here, the actual odds of them occurring together is about 0.44%. Now, I want you to look at those two numbers very carefully because they look very similar, but in fact, they are very, very different. And in fact, the number is 10 times higher than the other one. And so what that means is that if you swab a surface in your food processing plant, this particular food processing plant, and find a level of EB, numerous to count, you are at 10 times greater risk of finding salmonella on that surface at time or at any other time. And so that means is that in this particular case, the indicators are actually indicating something, and they're actually working to give you a useful prediction. This is only one data set from one food processing plant. I guarantee you that there are at least a few of you on the call today that are collecting data like this in your food processing plant, and if you're not analyzing it and looking for patterns like this, as the lawyer Bill Marler said, if you're collecting information and you're not doing anything with it, you're not collecting information. You're collecting evidence that he's going to use to sue you if you cause food poisoning. So this is not a plea for you to stop collecting data, but it is a plea for you to look at the data and analyze the data that you're collecting, because sometimes it can tell you some very useful information. So again, just a little bit of a plea here to utilize the data that you collect. Another story that I want to tell you, it's about supply management and compliance. And this one, the story's not over yet, and I don't know if it's going to have a happy ending. It's probably not going to be a really happy ending, but anyway, it nevertheless, it's a decision that you should be aware of. And I'm going to leave out the specifics because the dust hasn't settled on this one. There's an importer that's many specialty products from Europe. It's a small business. Time over decades, the small family business was built into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The company had the misfortune to import a product that made people sick. It was linked to an outbreak by the CDC and the FDA. There have been illnesses, there have been deaths, there have been lawsuits filed. In this particular case, the importer did wrong They handled the product exactly the way that they should have handled it. They just had the misfortune to buy from a company that had a big screw-up. And not to apologize for this company, because I think that the importer, because they were doing the best that they could, they had some quality specifications on the product. They did not have any microbiological specifications, and they did no regular microbiological testing. And until the point of that outbreak, they said, I think if you ask them, well, we've never had a problem. Why would we do this? So these are some important things to think about when you're buying from people. And again, I would encourage everybody. In fact, I was just contacted the other day, no joke, by a company, a company involved in the food business, who said we are in the process of reevaluating our microbiological specifications. And my immediate reaction was, that's a terrific idea. I think you should do that, and let me know if I can help. So certainly there are companies out there that have gotten the message that you ought to have micro specifications on your ingredients. And those would not be specifications that are static in time. They need to shift over time as our knowledge of food safety and of microbiology changes. And so I would encourage you to think about that, to ask yourself, what are our micro specs on our ingredients? And how do we evaluate those micro specs? Do we do spot testing? Do we a certificate of analysis? I have stories about companies getting sent the same certificate of analysis photocopied over and over again. Hopefully that's not happening in today's modern food supply, but you asking yourself, for one, to have specifications. Number two, am I auditing the supplier on those specifications by using an impartial lab? And then finally, you want to ask yourself, what am I going to do if I, heaven forbid, if I find a positive of a pathogen? And then even in terms of indicators, what would my specifications be in terms of indicators, and what am I going to do if I find a product that is violating of a standard on indicators? That's a little bit more tricky, because indicators don't indicate necessarily the presence of pathogens. The pathogens may be there, they may not. How do you react to a situation where a level of indicator is high? The answer is it's complicated. But again, something for all of you to think about. What to do with audits? When the folks at FoodSaftyTech came to me about the webinar, they said, we want to be sure to talk about audits. And I said, I think that's a great idea. I think audits are a problem in the food industry. We seem to not be able to live without them. On the other hand, we also know that those audits are sometimes problematic. Today is, thank goodness for my colleague, Doug Powell, because he also has thought long and hard about this issue of audits. And in fact, he has written an article with a bunch of other folks, including my other good friend and colleague, Schaffner, on critiquing the culture of audits in the industry. And so what I do, and then here as I bring my remarks close to a close, is to talk a little bit about audits. And again, I'm going to steal deliberately from this article. It's a great article. If you want to get it on the web, it's probably going to cost you $30 or $35. If you talk to a local university or your local public library, you can probably get a copy of it for free. It's definitely worth reading. They have a lot of good information in here that's well worth sharing. But since being able to do that, I am going to share with you what I think are the key points from this article. So, and the next two slides are drawn specifically from the Powell study. So, what is the limitations of audits? Well, the first thing to realize is that an audit is only a snapshot in time. The auditor is not there all the time. Certainly, they do not see the entire plant, and in fact, in many cases, the auditor will only see what the personnel let them see. So, the auditor is not omniscient. They don't have superpowers. They don't have X-ray vision. That said, a good auditor will know the questions to ask and will ask to see records. Will ask to see process deviations. Will ask to see the results of microbiological testing. So an audit is a snapshot in time, and it is limited. But again, a good auditor can expand that snapshot. Audits do have a reliance on an effective standard. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is the Jensen Farms outbreak with Listeria and cantaloupe. If you had gone to do an inspection of a farm for food safety, a cantaloupe farm for food safety, I think the primary focus would have been on salmonella risk. Now, granted, there are a lot of things that were wrong at Jensen Farms that would have been picked up by an audit, even an audit looking for problems with salmonella versus looking at problems with Listeria. But I think, nevertheless, that you have to realize that it kind of comes back to the issue that I talked about before with verification and validation. Relying on a standard that you believe to be valid, what standard is invalid, that's going to be an effective audit. If you're relying on an audit to show salmonella control and the real microbiological hazard in the operation is Listeria, well, then that is not going to be too helpful. An effective auditing tool required. For example, I think it's pretty well known now that DeCoster Eggs, which is an egg company in Iowa, caused a huge salmonella outbreak. I think it was a year or more ago now. This particular company had received a superior rating on their last audit from A&B International. So the question, I guess, that one of the questions we have to ask is what was actually in that auditing tool? And an audit is a checklist, and believe me, checklists are a wonderful, wonderful thing. There's a great book out there that I'm going to attempt to type into the slide here. The book is called the Checklist Manifesto. If I could only type. Checklist Manifesto. If I could only tell. That's close enough. Manifesto, there we go. The checklist, sorry, spelling is not my strong point. The Checklist Manifesto, it's by Atul Gawande. I'm not even going to try to type Atul Gawande for you there, but check out the Checklist Manifesto. It's not a book about food safety. It's a book by a surgeon about checklists, but it's a really wonderful, informative read, and it does show that checklists are really important. But the checklists have to be of the right thing, and I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here with this effective audit tool. It has to be the right checklist. Of course, the other thing that we like to talk about when we talk about audits is what's the auditor compliance. For example, the auditor that inspected the Peanut Butter Corporation of America plant shortly before they were found to have caused a very big outbreak was actually an expert on fresh produce, not an expert on peanuts. So while there probably is some crossover in terms of expertise, there is not a complete and full crossover there. So that's something else to think of. The next thing that I want to talk about is audit scope. There's an outbreak a number of years ago with a product called the Veggie Booty. If you don't have small kids, you probably don't know what this is, but if you do, or if you follow food safety, you'll know about it. This Veggie Booty is an extruded vegetable product that had and people apparently liked it because it was all vegetable and very healthy. This plant had an inspection that showed that they weren't excellent. However, the audit did not include supplier ingredient performance or specification. That it was an ingredient sprinkled on this extruded vegetable product that was actually the source of this information. So again, the audit scope, this gets back to sort of this issue of the checklist, right? The audit scope was inadequate. Another issue that I think we all struggle with, and I don't think we necessarily have a good solution, is the auditor relationship. There is almost an implicit conflict of interest. So the food processors, the food producers, and the food processors and retailers require suppliers to pay for their own audits. So a supplier is paying for a company in and tell them that they have problems and then to fix those problems. And so that creates an inherent conflict of interest. If the auditor does a really good job and really makes life miserable for the supplier, and the supplier is the one that's paying them, that's not necessarily a good business relationship. I don't know if we have an answer to that yet, but again, I think it's important that we point it out. And then finally, you may have the greatest audit in the world, you may have the best auditor in the world, and that auditor has found tons of problems, but in fact the auditors have no legal authority, they can't embargo products, they cannot demand records, and they cannot close an operation. It's only USDA and FDA that have that particular authority. So I think it's really important to note that even in the best of worlds, audits will not be perfect for that very reason. What now, and I realize that my slide numbering is a little bit off. I've got 3 more slides to go. So what I want to talk now is about the food safety, first of all, FISMA, and then also the Food Safety Controls Preventive Alliance. So if you read, if you have not gone and read the law in FISMA, I would encourage you to read it. And in specifically, I would say go and read Section 103, which is entitled Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventive Controls. If you look at this section, it does not ever anywhere mention the word HACCP. But if you read these bullet points right here, hazard analysis, preventive controls, monitoring effectiveness, corrective actions, verification, and record keeping, that's the principles of HACCP right there. Written right there in the rule. So even though this is not a rule about HACCP, it really is. It really is HACCP. And this is only for FDA products, and because seafood juice and seafood and juice, and then in a well acid canned foods also are governed under pre-existing rules. Those are exempted from this. But essentially, what this does, and specifically Section 103 of the Act does, is basically create HACCP for the rest of the food industry, because USDA is already under HACCP for meat and poultry, and seafood juice and low acid canned foods are being managed by HACCP or HACCP-like programs. This basically extends that to the rest of the industry. So definitely HACCP is coming to the rest of the industry, the rest of the food industry in the United States, even though it may not explicitly say that in the regulations. It definitely looks and feels just like HACCP to me. Now, to realize though that the risk controls that are talked about in the Act include things that we commonly think of as being prerequisite programs or pre-existing programs. So things like sanitation, supervisor training, environmental monitoring, food allergen, recall plan, GMP, supplier verifications, all of those things would historically come under programs. But guess what? They're going to be part of this program as well. So again, important to think about, and we've touched on many of these things in our remarks. So now by this point, you're ready to get off the phone and go start doing this stuff, or you're scratching your head and tearing your hair out and saying, I don't know what to do next. Well, the good is, and I don't want to portray this too much as being a white knight riding in to save us all, but there is something called the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. It's a group funded by the Food and Drug Administration. They are housed administratively at the Illinois Institute of Technology, the IFISH Center there. And this particular group has been given a charge to essentially help the food industry deal with Section 103 of FISMA. They're going to develop standardized training. They're going to deliver state-of-the-art distance learning. They develop train-the-trainer programs. They're going to create a technical assistance network. They're going to develop commodity-specific guidelines. They're going to assess knowledge gaps. They're going to identify controls, identify and compile critical limits. And I serve on the executive committee for this. I've been very involved. Many of you on the call may also be involved, or you may have other people in your company that are involved in this. We are making good progress. We don't have anything to share at this time, but of course we also don't have any actual final rules yet either, which I'm going to I'm going to close with. But keep your eyes out for what's going on with the Food Safety Preventive Goals Alliance. Many of you may be familiar, if you've worked in the canning industry, you may be familiar with the Better Process Control Schools. Many of you may also be familiar with the standard 2.5-day HACCP training that's taught by the grocery manufacturers or others, including Rutgers University. But essentially, what we're trying to do is to develop a training curriculum much along the lines of the Better Process Control School, or what used to be the Food Marketing or the Food Manufacturers Association HACCP training program, but targeted against these new rules on preventive control. Now, the key question that everybody has been asking is when are these rules coming out? They've been held up in Office of Management and Budget, which is the part of the government that reports directly to the White House that looks at the cost effectiveness of various rules. And so there were some delays in getting stuff written, but I think the latest delay has been one related to the election. And what I heard was that if Obama lost the election, we were going to see something come out really, really soon before Obama left office. Now that we have 4 more years with President Obama, I think that we'll see a little bit more leisurely rollout, but I would be very surprised if we did not see something I really believe we are going to see something in the first quarter of the next calendar year. So sometime in spring, early spring of 2013, hopefully we will see something coming out that's going to talk about, that's going to actually address some proposed rules to react to, so that we can finalize our training curriculum and so the industry can finally get that. So that is my last slide, and Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dan. And just to kind of throw this back out to the audience, there's been a lot of questions coming in, and we will be getting to them after the next presentation. But I would encourage you to continue to still use the Q&A and enter the questions in. So move on, and I'd now introduce Dan Bernkopf, who's the Vice President of Food Safety and Quality Assurance Applications for SafetyChain, who will provide a high-level overview of how technology can promote better HACCP compliance. Dan Bernkopf has spent more than 30 years as an innovator in the food safety and quality industry, with extensive frontline experience leading integrated food safety and quality assurance initiatives as both a consultant to and an executive with leading food producers and manufacturers. And let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And Don, I just want to compliment you on a terrific and informative presentation. I'm going to cover a couple of things today, very high level. HACCP compliance, into data management. I'm going to talk about challenges, and I'm also going to talk about solutions. So let's talk a little bit about challenges today. You know, we ask ourselves these questions: how can we gather all data in a timely manner? You know, HACCP reporting today is done in pen and paper forms. It's inherently difficult to work with, and truly, based on pen and paper forms, you know exactly when your monitor is taking it. Good records. It's a good question. And then how can we analyze and filter data for immediate corrections? There's a non-compliant event in your HACCP program, critical violation. Key decision makers need to know their various communication is within a plan. Sometimes you chase people down and inform them. And then when you think about trending HACCP information or filtering data, it's no secret. Pen forms are not trend analysis friendly. You've got to come and re-enter those in a spreadsheet and look for them after you grab those spreadsheets. So the issues with pen and paper forms and traditional methods of gathering information. So when it comes up, how can we prevent non-compliant raw materials from coming to your facilities and non-compliant finished goods from going out? Supply COAs, verification is done manually, and some COAs simply collected and filed away without verifications. Let's go. Don talked about COAs and being shipped over and over again. And that too. Outbound COAs or hold and release programs take time and effort to manually compile and conduct outbound shipments. People have other things to do. They just look at the information that needs to be compiled for COAs and hold and release programs. And the challenge is how do you automate electronic access to all historical documents and records and as well. HACCP records are often stuffed in the file cabinets and binders, very labor-intensive and error-prone activity. So all elements, including forensics and records into a common electronic source, has obvious time savings and accuracy benefits. And about challenges is how can we usually change HACCP documentation? This annual reassessments, new regulatory requirements, or if you have a new process in your facility that requires a new HACCP program. Storage sites of HACCP program documents can create great confusion in the plant. Are all programs and forms current at your facility? Are programs always purged? Or is there opportunity for inadvertent use anywhere in your facilities? These are problems. These challenges that we face today. So let's look at some of the solutions. Technology creates HACCP compliance efficiencies. Eliminate manual process, critical tasks are completed, and try to promote prevention versus action. For example, SafetyChain for Food Solutions automates CCP monitoring verifications against limit parameters. This helps speed through your processes, getting product out the door quicker. You can develop email or text alerts to execute HACCP tasks on time and then electronically, automatically compare HACCP data values against critical limits, eliminating the potential reported HACCP deviations or omissions. We use devices like Woods tablets to conform instead of the old paper forms that I alluded to earlier. So you can trigger critical limit deviation alerts in real time from the detection for corrective actions. Software can report critical limit deviations automatically to HACCP non-compliant alerts key stakeholders. And this is address one of the challenges I spoke to earlier about communications. Better yet, prevent critical limit deviations wherever possible. One I like to use is to talk about meat facilities that use a Tompkins study for temperature control. Oftentimes, critical limits at 44 degrees. Normal cooler temperatures might range from 30 to 35 degrees. Why do you hit that critical limit? Instead, send an email or text alert out at 38 degrees, alerting your food safety department as well as your maintenance department, who may be responsible for refrigeration. Eliminate the need to report a non-compliant event to your HACCP program. There's managing inbound production and outbound compliance. This is not only true for your HACCP programs, but also for your quality programs as well. Likely analyze COAs automatically against your specs before agreed shipments are unloaded, and provide real-time notifications of internal HACCP and quality data and conformance. Then likely assemble HACCP food safety and quality data for COAs or internal hold and release programs. If there's exception or deviation, automatically send an email notification to key personnel in a variety of departments simultaneously, whether it's in production, shipping, food safety, quality assurance, or any other key stakeholder in your facility. And corrective actions immediately. You can post up an automatic hold order if there's an issue on compliance. Excuse me. And then immediate cascade information on new updates throughout the chain. Updated programs and forms plague manual HACCP systems. Prevent program elements from being used by having a single up-to-date electronic stored in a specification document repository. Make a single source for all, and there's no outdated forms available. And then one thing that I have seen as a consultant is the efficacy of records. Time and date stamp are really and important software, electronically enhanced or HACCP programs, and quality programs for that matter. Create records, accuracy with alterable time and date stamps, electronic signatures, 21 CFR of compliant. This is truly great stuff, and as an auditor, I love the electronic documents that have a feature. And then I want to talk just briefly about, sorry, didn't look that so early. FSQA technology helps you to be audit ready on demand. All has done quality documents, prerequisite programs, and verification records in one easily accessible, user-friendly document repository and database. Get a mountain of paperwork and the house, and be audit ready at the time from any computer that has an internet access. This is truly a good feature for not only regulatory but non-regulatory audits. For FDA, USDA, customer audits, third-party audits, including this for GFI, including SQF and BRC. Really concludes my brief overview of what I wanted to address today. So I'd like to turn it back to you if I may. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. To let everyone know, we do plan on staying a little bit longer over the hour than we had allotted because we've got a lot of questions. And I'd like to begin almost with a statement and kind of direct this to you, Don. You were talking about auditors and the kind of interest that they potentially can create with the food company themselves paying the auditor. Now, if someone was to use a GFSI audit, believe that they have stringent requirements to minimize the conflict of interest, and the auditors and the audit companies themselves did by an accreditation body to kind of avoid this conflict of interest. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, that's a really good question, Rick, and you know, and big kudos going out to the GFSI folks for trying to get their hands around this and to move us forward. I am not probably as familiar with GFSI as I should be because I was kind of waiting to see if it would take off and really turn into the that we all thought it would be. I think it's pretty clear that it has turned into a pretty wonderful program that does seem to be getting wide adoption and traction. But the kind of thing that you're talking about there, Rick, I think that is absolutely key. The more that we can do to remove that conflict of interest, again, through accreditation or through adherence to some sort of a standard, as much as I hate to be boxed in by standards, I think that's probably going to be the way to go here, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Right. And we did cover this topic at the two FoodSaftyTech conferences that we had this year on supply chain vulnerabilities, and then another one on food safety supply chain management. And we did, on the second program, have one of the board directors for GFSI speak, and it was quite interesting, and that information is going to be available to the FoodSaftyTech audience for a on-demand webinar probably in about 30 days. So I just wanted to put that out because there were some really good presentations at both regarding the issues of auditor competency, so to speak. And I wanted to talk, direct something to you. And you were talking about electronic management of HACCP records. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, really, thank you for that question. Really, there is no limitation on those records, whether it is the HACCP program itself, hazard analysis, and the records. The great advantage to housing records in a database that has dashboards is the ability to look at trending information over time. And that really addresses things like continuous improvement so that you can improve your process, improve your food plan over time. It actually gets to that validation question that Don brought up earlier. Being able to easily review fiscal HACCP records is a great benefit to any company that has that capability.
Great. Great. And one more. This is from someone in the audience. I work in a USDA facility, and we have to put together daily HACCP pre-shipment review forms. Can software help with this task?
Absolutely. I would tell you that some USDA inspectors, inspectors in charge of particular facilities, are very much used to seeing everything in bound paper. But the truth is that I've also seen an evolution towards electronic management of pre-shipment reviews, include electronic signatures, and the fact electronic review of data includes compliance to 21 CFR Part 11. It guarantees the efficacy of those records, and explanation given to an inspector should win them over pretty quickly. That you can even provide a very small slice of a software system, allowing the inspector just the pre-shipment inspection in your HACCP plan and nothing else. It creates great trust, and particularly it can be a particular benefit long-term with your inspector in charge and USDA in general.
Okay. Hey, we've got a question on the IFT traceability study, and I'm trying to kind of make heads or tails of this, but I think let me just get the gist of this to you. What is the cause of the traceability failure? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, basically, again, this is I included those slides because I think it's a really interesting study, and I wanted to give them some exposure. I am not an investigator on the study, so this answer. So first of all, for the definitive answer, the questioner should follow up with Tejas Bhatt from IFT, and I did make it very sure to include Tejas's email on that slide. So if somebody has questions, they can follow up with him or locate him on the web pretty easily. He's got a very unique name. He's the only Tejas Bhatt that works for IFT. So certainly that's a possibility. The cause of traceability failure, so some of the failures were because the companies just simply couldn't input the data, but if we look at the other the failures, it was where the company not able to complete the traceability analysis. So again, and maybe I didn't explain this too well during my talk, but the basic idea is that these companies were given data, and so this wasn't an actual traceability study, it was fictitious data, and then they ran their software, their algorithm against those data and tried to determine what the cause was or where the product ended up. And so a failure would be where they completed the exercise, but they got the wrong answer, I guess is probably the simplest way to say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Jennifer McIntyre played a role in that IFT traceability study as well, and she's at Levitt Partners and can be found pretty easily on the web also.
Yeah, Jen did start off leading that study. She then changed jobs and moved to Levitt Partners. Jen is also just a terrific person and a Rutgers graduate, I would point out.
It plugs out. Does a co-packer who allows a customer to bring in ingredients handle proper traceability if the customer has approved the supplier program? And this continues. Who owns this issue if the co-packer has no direct link to the manufacturer of the ingredient?
That's a really good question, and I would say my kind of simple answer is before you get into any kind of agreements like that, you ought to have answers, and they ought to be in documents that are reviewed by lawyers, because this sounds like a potentially a really bad situation for the co-packer. I'm assuming the question is coming from the co-packer, not the customer that's coming in. That's like a huge liability for the co-packer, and I would, it sounds like the person that asked the question is asking all of the right questions. And I would say, obviously a lot of those things can be negotiated when you're negotiating the agreement to use the facility, and man, I would make sure that I had rock solid answers to all of those questions, and that like I said, those documents were reviewed by lawyers on both sides. because that seems like it could be a big problem.
Yeah, I agree. Is supplier management and compliance considered as one of the prerequisite programs to HACCP?
Historically, it's mentioned, but I think what we're seeing with all of this interest in traceability and recalls and stuff, I think it's only going to continue to become more important. But yes, it would traditionally be a prerequisite program in HACCP, but it's risen to a very, very high level of interest, again, in part because of these multi-component products and recalls. We're seeing it with land products. So definitely get your order. If you're in the food industry and you're listening to this call, get your house in order in terms of those supplier programs. It's absolutely critical.
Let's go back to the topic of audits. And I'm not sure you're going to be the right person to answer this because of how you clarify yourself. And Dan, I don't know if you know this either, but I'm going to read it out to you, and if not, we're going to try and provide some resources for this attendee. But under FSI, can a facility ask to have an auditor changed if they decide the auditor is not competent at their job?
And from Rick, go ahead. Yeah.
Just going to say, their opportunity, it doesn't happen very often. I know I've worked with Tatiana Lorica from ELAB, and it's very important. GFI, every one of the schemes support that if you don't get an auditor is qualified, I'm sure there's some remedial action that can be taken. So clearly that is that's the qualifications of an auditor as they inspect your facility are truly exceedingly important. It's a subject of every FSI conference I've ever been to. It's a great sensitivity for SQF, BRC, and the rest. So I think that clearly that's been earmarked for improvement over time.
Don, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, that's a terrific answer. I wouldn't change a thing.
Okay, terrific. Let's just. You've had we've done a variety of different webinars with you in the past, and you've authored some different types of goals and such. But can you provide some resources for one of our attendees specifically on creating an effective HACCP program? Where do you begin? Where do you start? How do you start? What are the guidelines for this?
If you have not been to a HACCP training course yet, get a HACCP training course. We offer one at Rutgers University once a year. Unfortunately, that time's already come and gone for this year. But we're not the only game in town. If you go to the International HACCP Alliance website, you can get information about HACCP training courses there, mostly focused on meat and grease. FDA juice HACCP training all the time, FDA seafood HACCP training all the time. A number of universities do it. I would say if you have not been to an introductory HACCP course, again, they're usually about 2.5 days long. Many universities have them. Get one of those. I think for the procedure juice, or maybe for both, there's an online portion that you can do prior to the shorter in-person version. Can't simply afford the time to do that, I would say get a book on HACCP. There's a great one that's that we use in our HACCP training at Rutgers University. It's put out. It used to be the National Food Processors Association. It's now the Grocery Manufacturers Association. If you go to the GMA website and you look for publications, you can get a HACCP book from them, which is literally the book that we use to teach HACCP. The textbook is HACCP Systematic Approach to Food Safety. So by all means, go and get a copy of that book. It's a wonderful way to get started. If you read that book, you'll be well on your way.
I have one more, and I'm actually going to make a comment after I read the question. And I'm going to ask both of you to expand on and provide, your commentary and thoughts on this. And we're seeing more and more of this. I mean, we live in a global economy, and more and more food is being imported into the United States, both as finished product but also as raw material, which is creating, which has its own vulnerabilities because of where it's coming from. And the question is, with emphasis on a global marketplace, shouldn't a produce company's HACCP plan be consistent with the guidelines of GFSI? Now, in my opinion, it depends on what you're coming from. Meaning, are you being compliant with GFSI because your customers require it or because you want to? Do you have a HACCP plan because you need to or do you want to? Meaning, you can have a good HACCP plan and you can have a great HACCP plan and you can have not a very good one. I think it depends on how the company views both HACCP and GFSI. Are you doing it to protect your customers, and are you doing it to protect yourself? Are you doing it because it's required of you by someone else, whether that be regulatory compliance or customer compliance? But in my opinion, everything that I've learned in this space has been that the first way to look at this is protecting your customers and protecting your company, protecting your brand, and then being compliant with everything else. Now, I'm not trying to direct your answers, but I'd like you both to comment on that. And again, if you think that I'm incorrect on that, please correct me.
Yeah, I'll go first. No, I don't think that you're incorrect. I think that you're absolutely spot on. Frank has talked about creating a food safety culture. Frank used to be at Disney, now he's at Walmart. Doug Powell and food control article that I talked about in my remarks talks about a food safety culture. If you're food safety because it's a requirement of your customers, then you don't have a food safety culture, and you're going to have problems. So you need to be doing it for the right reasons. Just to circle back to the comments about importing at the beginning, clearly, global food supply, we have more and more imported foods. FDA understands this. That's why there's so much in FISMA that specifically looks at imported foods. There's a whole section on that. The whole idea of can you even do HACCP for produce? I'm not sure really you can do HACCP for produce. No, there is no kill step. Now that said, we could have maybe an interesting discussion over a beer or two about exactly what it means to be do produce HACCP. What I can say is that this is an area where there's a tremendous amount of research interest, and I'll also say too, thinking about this issue of cantaloupe, there's a lot of discussion. I mean, I know I've been talking about it with many of my friends about with cantaloupe, maybe we ought to go to a field pack situation, and we ought to not get these products wet. We ought to get dry, get the dirt off, and not get them wet, because when you get them wet, you're going to spread any contamination around. On the other hand, with leafy greens that come out of the field, well, the issue is you've got to wash them off. You can't ship them. You can't ship them with dirt on them. I don't think they'll stand to it. There, the issue becomes one of managing cross-contamination in the dunk tanks. And I did a risk assessment with my colleague Michelle Daniluk that we published in Journal of Food Protection in last year, looking at leafy greens and specifically trying to reconstruct via computer model the spit break, and we showed that cross-contamination management was absolutely critical in preventing that kind of a problem. So you really, I would say again, especially with produce, you really have to be keeping up with the cutting edge of what's going on in food safety today. Reading journals and attending the scientific meetings to keep up with all of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to the food safety culture, there is quite a bit of resources on SafetyChain's website in terms of an ROI on food safety, meaning you can use some of the technology tools out there, like SafetyChain Software, and actually help create an ROI for this investment, meaning you're doing it for all the right reasons, but it also isn't just an expense line. And I would encourage everyone to visit SafetyChain's website. There's quite a bit of resources related to that, and it could help foster the food safety culture within your company. We're running out of time. There is a few more questions, but we're not really going to be able to handle them right now. The thing that I did want to remind everyone is that SafetyChain will be emailing the slides, as well as we'll be sending out the recording of this to everyone who has registered, and for those folks that registered that didn't make it for the live event, we'll be seeing and getting the presentations next week. And with that concludes at least the Q&A part, and I'd like to turn this back over to Patty.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you to our two speakers, Don Schaffner and Dan Bernkopf. And thank you also to our attendees for sending in such great questions, and you've been sending us some nice feedback on the event. You've been seeing a screen on you've been seeing this slide on your screen for a little bit. For more information on SafetyChain software, and specifically SafetyChain for food, please feel free to reach out to them at info@safetychain.com or dial 888-235-7540. SafetyChain for food helps save time, save money, and create efficiencies that support SQA compliance at all points along your supply chain, from inbound through production and also outbound. I want to direct you to the Food Supply Chain Resource Center. I think Rick mentioned this a little bit, but there's breaking news, strategic white papers, timely industry polls, webinar news, and archives. And to go there, you can just go to FoodSafetyTech.com and click on the Resource Center. And I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Sorry, Rick, just for 1 minute, to talk about our very exciting conference that we have coming up March 19th through 20th next year. Rick?
Great. Thanks, Patty. There were really good questions that came up in this presentation today, and one of the components of FoodSaftyTech is our events side of thing, and we're going to be doing 5 different programs next year, 2 programs on supply chain management specific to food safety. We're looking at another program next year on risk management and HACCP. Would be a 1.5 to 2 day program. And then the one on the screen right now is something in the works that we're partnering with PitCon, and it's a conference on best practices in lab management for specifically to foods. And it will be co-located with the Pittsburgh Conference Expo, and there'll be more information on FoodSaftyTech's website in about 2 weeks. I'll formally announce it then. So we'll be formally announcing it right around the Thanksgiving time frame. But very excited about this and expanding upon the event side of and component of FoodSaftyTech.
As Rick mentioned, SafetyChain will be sending you out emails on Monday next week, and you will receive the copy of the slides from today's event as well as the link to the archived recording. And with that, thank you again, everybody. Have a great day. This concludes our event.